Anyway, good afternoon, Jonathan. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Great. I'm okay. Thank you very much indeed. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about what you're up to at the moment in astrology.
Well, what I'm up to at the moment is much the same as I'm always up to. I write the column, and then when I get to the end of writing the column, I write the next column. Then the one after that. It's a bit endless being a sun sign columnist because, in fact, I remember going when I first went to for my job at the Daily Mail, and I spoke to the editor, who's still the editor, and I said to him, "Can I have holidays?" And he said, "No, your furniture."
Yeah,
And I said, "What's furniture?" He said, "Well, furniture's cartoons, crosswords, and horoscopes. They
I
don't have
see.
holidays." Anyway, I think, the only sun sign astrologer in the national media in this country or any other who actually does have holidays enshrined in his contract. I don't always take them, but I've
Yeah.
got a legal right to them.
Oh, well, I should. If I were you, I'd take as many as possible.
Yes, I know, but that means someone else would have to write the column. And the problem with that is I've never found anybody else who can do it quite the way I do it.
How long have you been doing it?
My first horoscope, or not horoscope, we mustn't use that word of talking amongst professional astrologers, because of course it's not a horoscope column. It's one of the things I have to try and educate my public to understand. But my first column of daily Zodiac forecasts appeared on March 6th, 1986, or was it March 4th, 1986? Anyway, so 30 years I've been doing it.
30.
Mm.
That's about as long as I've been going, actually. Um,
Flies by when you're having fun.
yeah, yeah. It's not always fun, mind you. Um,
It flies by even when you're suffering stress too, doesn't it?
how did you first get into it?
Into astrology.
Yeah,
I was, I'd sort of hung out with hippies and alternative types from a very long time. And of course, in the 70s, that was the language of the day. Oh, what's your sign, man?
yeah.
And so I'd always had an interest, and I knew some people who were very keen on astrology. And then when I was living in Los Angeles, um, somebody read my chart for me.
Yeah,
And I went, "How do you know all that about me?" And they said, "Well, it's
good.
in your chart." And I said, "Well, what do you mean it's in my chart?" And they showed me, and I said, "Well, are you using some special psychic power
Yeah,
to tell me all this piece of information?" He said, "No, no, I'm just using what I understand about this opposition and that square and that trine." And I went, "Ah, okay. Well, in that case, I'd like to learn how to do that because that's a mighty good trick."
yeah.
So it was on that basis that I began to pick up the tools which eventually led me to become an astrologer.
Right. That's always the way, isn't it? You
I
know,
think so.
you're
So
able.
somebody shows you and you go, "Oh, that's exciting."
I think what impressed me was that it can work the other way around as well. You can do a blind chart. You've not necessarily met the person,
Mm,
and maybe you meet them after, or or maybe not at all. But you find out that someone has said, "Oh, your chart was dead accurate," and you go, "Wow!"
mm.
So it impresses you as well. The fact
Yes,
that,
yes, yes. That's
are you
very
with me?
true. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yes, I began, and I still am to some extent, skeptical about a lot of the traditions in astrology. I still think that we accept too many of them without proper scrutiny and question.
Yeah,
But nonetheless, much more often than I find myself going, "Look, see, that doesn't work," I come across stuff and go, "Oh, that really does work. That is impressive how it works."
yeah, sure. Because you've got certain um, what seem like to be arbitrary rules, don't you? I mean, you've got things like the rulership of Virgo.
Mm,
Why would it be Mercury? You know,
mhm,
and it started off. I think it was Ptolemy, wasn't it? He started with the sun and the moon,
mm,
and then he was working around. So if you put those sun and the moon at the top, like the top of a circle, and if you work either side,
mm.
then you get Mercury. So we move forward. The sun rules Leo, so we move on, and that's Virgo. So the one before would be Mercury as well. So the one before Cancer, ruled by the moon, is Gemini, and then he moved outward,
Is that
and that's how
right?
we end up with what we've got. And of course, there are only 7 planets though in those days.
I don't know whether Ptolemy originated that or whether it goes back further, and I'm afraid
Yeah,
my historical qualifications are too flimsy to stand this up. But Do we know that he actually pioneered that, or was it
According to
just
Robert Hand, anyway.
okay? And Robert Hand was there at the time. I mean, I have
I
a problem
think.
with Robert Hand
Well,
because
you know, you've heard of the Tetrabiblos.
yes, yes, yes.
I think it's in there. I think he's,
I know it's in there. It's absolutely in there. My
yeah,
question is that one of the problems that you have when you go further back in time for source material about what traditions people are following is that the human race has a long, glorious tradition of burning each other's books. Every time one nation conquers another, the first thing they do is rip up the library. Or when they finish looting and pillaging, they
yeah,
go and do that anyway. So Tetrabiblos survives, but it's very hard to find anything that survives before that. But it might be a great mistake to say that just because Tetrabiblos is the first extant example of
yeah.
it, that we can therefore assume that that's where it began. I don't know how many tricks Ptolemy personally coined and how many of them he was just faithfully reporting because that's how it had been taught to him from
Yeah,
his predecessors.
yeah. And it's unfortunate, isn't it, that we don't have a lot of written records before Ptolemy. I mean, we've got references to elements and Empedocles. He didn't actually call them elements, but he was obviously thinking about the four elements.
Mm.
And then, there are various references, but I think Ptolemy is supposed to be the first one that we know of properly, who put it all together.
Yes, he's, the oldest book in my collection is his.
Yeah,
But like I say, I like to entertain the fantasy that he was drawing on a much greater library
yeah,
still,
yeah,
none of
sure.
which is extant today.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, changing the subject a little bit, how much skepticism have you faced? I mean, I was looking at I was looking on YouTube just yesterday evening, and you appeared on the BBC with Richard Dawkins.
I did.
How did you
I
find
did.
that?
I took a dictionary into that interview. I was a kid then. It was a long time ago. Over 20 years ago I did that interview with Dawkins.
Right.
And I took in a dictionary, one of those blooming great heavy ones that you can use to prop up your coffee table if one of the legs is short.
Yeah.
And I said, look, I've got this here, proper dictionary here. This is back in the days before, dictionaries were online. And I said, there are pages and pages defining what science means. And not once in any of those pages is there the word proof. Yes, one of the things, as we all know only too well as astrologers, is that our work is not evidence-based and is unlikely ever to be seriously evidence-based.
Yeah.
And of course, there is such a kind of narrow-minded bigotry amongst the scientific and academic community that anybody who ever found anything that vaguely supported the claim of an astrologer or indeed a practitioner in any esoteric field would be instantly, they'd have their grants cut off, they'd be ostracized by their peers, they'd be ridiculed. There is a passionate desire not to find proof for astrology, and when you ally that to a subject which is by nature subjective, the likelihood, therefore, is that you're a walking target for skepticism, because every cynic and skeptic just takes one look at you and goes, aha, yes, well, you can't prove any of this, can you?
We do have a tiny bit of ammunition, don't we, with Gokula?
We do, except they love to throw
Mars effect.
They love to throw rocks and stones at the Gokalan effect too. I mean, we don't have very much. Gokalan stuff is good as far as it goes, but again, it's never been, to my knowledge, fully or satisfactorily replicated.
No.
And I think we waste our time when we attempt to try and shout that we've got verification or provability. I think, why bother playing their game? Good luck to them if that's what they want. Astrology is not a science, and the people who ever claimed that it was really did us a great disservice. A lot of turn of the last century astrologers jumped on the whole bandwagon of wanting to say that somehow astrology is a science, not an art. And in the process, they left today's astrology is very vulnerable as we stand here blinking in the daylight looking at, of course this isn't a science. Of course there is nothing scientific about what we do. Astrology is a belief system. It is a religion. It's neither an art nor a science, but we're daft if we try and support it with proof which we can't produce.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no causal mechanism for it, is there?
Not as far as I'm aware. But again, a lot of postulation, a lot of theory, a lot of, hypothesis and imagination has been brought to bear on, the idea that it's caused by this or it's that. I mean, and people get very excited and they say, well, it's, because of course there is some kind of gravitational interaction between the moon and the Earth.
Yeah.
There is a tendency to assume, therefore, that somehow some form of imperceptible gravitational wave, to use the newly discovered term that's catching all the headlines these days, perhaps that's what explains it. Well, perhaps it is, and perhaps it's just coincidence. Once again, I don't think we'll do ourselves any favours if we look for explanations like that. No. We have to start taking what we do on trust, or we're going to dig ourselves a terrible hole.
Yeah. Did you see the interview with Dawkins and Neil Spencer? I mean, Dawkins said to him, because it's all very reductionist, this approach, isn't it? And he said, do you think that there is some kind of beam of energy coming from the planets? And that's I don't think Neil Spencer properly really knew how to answer in a way that would be satisfactory.
Neil Spencer's a mighty good astrologer.
Yeah.
I don't know. I didn't see that interview, but I don't think it's got anything to do with beams of energy. I think it's just, I reckon the movements of the planets are a bit like a bus timetable, set up in the sky for our convenience so we can get an idea of what's coming along when. And I don't think the bus timetable causes the buses to leave the bus station and to go and pick people up along the road. And I don't think the planets cause us to do things. I think just that by studying the positions of the planets, you get some idea of what we are likely to be doing. With the cause and effect in it, as you rightly say, it's very questionable.
And I don't think synchronicity is going to be good enough for scientists either, is it?
No, it isn't. When you say synchronicity, what do you mean by synchronicity?
I mean that it's acausal. I mean that you have two events happening at the same time, in this case, the cosmos and the life of an individual. For example, you have the Saturn return. You find that your life is changing dramatically around the Saturn return. Things are starting to crystallize. You suddenly realize what you've been doing wrong. That is a big turning point. And it's reflected out there as well.
Yes. Again, does the fact that Saturn's coming back cause the fact that you're having a Saturn return, or does it just simply reflect the fact that is what's likely to be happening to you? It's a way of measuring an inner cycle that I don't know. I don't want to get too drawn into the airy-fairy theory. I don't know how it works. I just know that it works.
Yeah. I have to ask you about Raphael's Ephemeris as well.
Oh yeah.
How important is it to these days, in the midst of all these computer programs, to be able to use an ephemeris?
I have yet to find an app of any kind that rivals or even comes close to the satisfaction and the convenience of having that little booklet in my pocket. And it's perfectly designed for your inside jacket pocket, or I've got these cargo trousers I often wear because they exactly fit a Raphael'S into the left leg.
Yeah.
I do like to be able to do that. I mean, I do sometimes wish as I grow older that Raphael'S would kindly use slightly larger type. But, a set of Raphael in the left hand and a pair of spectacles in the right, and I can work anywhere.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of people comment on they like the fact that it's portable.
Exactly. It's light, it's portable, it's current, it gives you all the detail at a glance, and I'm very fond of it. I never leave home without one.
Thank you very much. So if we let's just look a little bit at a birth chart. What is it that makes an individual? Would you say?
In a birth chart,
Hmm.
what makes an individual in a birth chart? The combined influences of all the planets and the planetary alignments within their chart. Um, I
And
don't, what one of the interesting things about practicing astrology is that people love to isolate and oversimplify, and
yeah,
obviously I'm a prime example of that. I peddle the sun sign mythology for a living, although I'm working on a plan eventually to liberate myself from that. But for now, at least, that's what I'm obliged to do. People love to oversimplify. Oh, it's my moon sign. Oh, it's my rising sign. Oh, it's my, actually, no, it's all of it. It's all the alignments, and it's all the lines of tension and the lines of support between the different planets at the moment you were born, which go to make up who you are. And I wouldn't like to say that there's one particular aspect of astrology that's more important than any other when it comes to defining who we are.
yeah. Could you maybe tell us a little bit about your own chart?
Ooh, my own chart. As far as I know, bearing in mind that like many people born in Britain, I'm not blessed with the benefit of an exact record of my own birth time.
Right.
And my mum, very annoyingly, just says around 8 o'clock in the morning. Um, Whether it was 5 to or 5 past or who knows what, I'll never know. And of course, you can't. I mean, you can't rectify anybody's chart. You certainly can't rectify your own. But I question very severely the entire concept of rectification. But anyway, you didn't ask me about that. You asked me about what's in my chart. Saturn in Sagittarius in the 12th. Sagittarius rising. Sun pretty much bang on the ascendant.
Uh-huh.
Moon on Serpentis, the accursed degree of the accursed sign, and Sun of a galactic centre. Those are, I think, perhaps the two most interesting aspects of my chart.
Mm.
Oh, and Mercury in Capricorn, which I think probably helps in terms of me sounding like I know more than I actually do.
Well, I'm sure you know a great deal. I mean, did you ever get into some of the more specialised areas? I mean, things like harmonics and
I knew from quite an early on point in my study of astrology that I was probably going to end up in the shallow end for most of my life.
right.
Unlike some other astrologers who work down the shallow end, I've got a degree of pride, and I felt I never wanted to encounter an astrologer who could quote some obscure aspect of astrology
Yeah.
that this is my moon in Scorpio talking probably that I didn't know or I hadn't studied. So yes, I did explore harmonics. And I explored all sorts of things, including Eberton's theoreticals. I went and looked at all sorts of stuff because I felt obliged to properly know what I was talking about,
Yeah.
in as much as any of us do. And ultimately, you can always get to a point where you go, well, none of us really know what we're talking about, no matter how far into a subject we go. But as far as I could go, I went.
What about midpoints?
I personally haven't got the time for them. I
Yeah.
experimented with them, I played with them, I have great respect for the other astrologers who work with those. But back when I was studying astrology, it was pointed out that there are so many different ways of reading a chart, so many different theories about what works, what doesn't, or why don't you do midpoints, why don't you do harmonics, why don't you do, you could end up with interpretation, you could end up with a telephone directory, well, using an old-fashioned, what's a modern explanation for a telephone directory? There'll be listeners to this who don't know what we're talking about here. Anyway, you'd end up with volume after volume of interpretation, and you'd cover every possible base. And as an astrologer, you'd drive yourself insane if you used every interpretive technique.
Yeah.
I personally don't like midpoints, although I understand why some people consider them important. I absolutely refute and reject the concept of progression. I think it's absolute rubbish. It's a load of imagination, and it's the worst kind of nonsense. I've very great faith in transits, but yet to see any evidence that progressions are worth the paper they're printed on, or But at the same time, I've developed my somewhat bigoted stance and my strong feeling of, oh no, that's no good, because otherwise I'm going to get swamped by too much technique and too many alternatives. It seems to me like the basics of astrology ought to be right there in the simplicity of the art, and don't overcomplicate it until you've satisfied yourself that you fully understand how to use the primary techniques.
Yeah. So, based on what you've just said there, I don't suppose you're at all interested in a lot of these newer planets as well.
No, well, newer planets is a bit of a different thing. Which newer planets do you mean?
I'm personally, I'm very interested in the new centaurs at the moment. I mean, we've got Chiron already.
I don't work with Chiron.
No.
I understand why many of my respected colleagues do. Good
Yeah.
luck to them. I still feel that if you're looking for the essence of where the healer is inside you, you can find that through an understanding of the traditional planets. And I don't tend to work with. I mean, I'm very interested in this new planet that they've just theoretically announced the existence of, but have yet to discover any physical proof of.
Yeah.
I do think that one's a good one and a big one. But no, I don't. Again, to me, this is astrologers looking beyond what's basically there in the chart already,
Yeah.
and gilding a lily that's already very beautiful.
Yeah. So, what about asteroids? No.
Not for me, thanks.
No.
Pass. I mean, again, you can do it, but then that's the joy of astrology. It will create an endless series of vacuums that will suck you in. Ooh, look at these asteroids and what they're telling me, and what that's telling me, and what these, this harmonic's telling me, and that. Again, fine, great. The world of astrology is full of mysterious little kind of vortexes in which you can find yourself spiraling inwards forever. But the key to understanding yourself, your life, your future, I tend to feel very strongly, which obviously I feel that way, because this is not an interview about Raphael's, is it not? And Raphael's doesn't list all the asteroids in there, which is, I suppose, is one reason why I find it suits me.
I think there is a large format edition. I think they've put the first 4 in there.
Bless them.
See, I mean, Ceres is even listed as an ordinary planet now in the American.
I've got some, I can, as far as I'm concerned, the great tradition that astrologers take their cue from the astronomers is fair comment. Ceres, when it was first discovered in 1801, if I'm not much mistaken,
Yeah, that's right.
was weighty enough at the time that it deserved that much of a focus. And the fact that it's now given equal billing with Pluto in terms of importance means, yes, we should be looking at Ceres more closely. So, yeah, all right, when I say no to the asteroids, and I'll let Ceres in. Ceres, although I don't personally work with it, I probably should.
I'm interested because I want to know what really rules Virgo.
I'm interested in the idea that the zodiac signs themselves are an irrelevance. This is a dreadful thing for a sun sign astrologer to say.
I
But
can cut that bit out if you want.
no, I don't mind. It's all right. Kepler said, look, in astrology, it's not the zodiac signs, actually. It's the angles. It's the aspects. They're everything. The aspects between the planets and between the moon and the planets. They're what you want to be drawing all your predictions from and all your inferences from. I remember as a student astrologer, we used to play a game in our little study group where we'd cover up the zodiac signs and interpret the chart just on the angles. It's all in there. And I don't really know how much even of the basic 12 signs of the zodiac really deserves the amount of respect that we give it. I don't know if anything governs Virgo. Does something have to govern it? I mean, obviously, you need it in order to create a nice mental picture of how the universe works, but it might be that nice, neat picture is a great piece of deception anyway.
Well, I've never heard it put quite like that. That's very interesting about the sort of primacy or otherwise of sun signs. Which brings me on nicely to What do you think about houses? Do you use a particular system, or do you generally disregard them?
Houses really annoy me.
Right.
Houses are the biggest. I better not use bad language, have I? But I'm so sorry. Look, first of all, being a British astrologer, I've really got to talk from my experience. The majority of my clients have no idea what time they were born or only the roughest of idea. Therefore, the calculation of their ascendant and their midheaven is going to be unreliable at best.
Mm.
Given that astrologers are capable of kidding themselves of a rectification is possible on the basis of no scientific proof whatsoever, oh, well, I just feel it's this way. You know, you can't, you're not accurate, even with the basic raw information to begin with, and then you're going to get into some theoretical argument about which way you chop up the sky according to whose half-baked idiotic system. If I have to use houses, I'll use porphyry because it's the simplest. But
Yeah.
actually, again, if you want information out of a chart, go and look at the alignments between the actual planets. Don't, under any circumstances, calculate alignments to the ascendant or alignments to the midheaven, or as I've often seen in some amazing attempts to be overcomplicating the obvious, alignments to the nodes. Don't go there. Just look at the planets and the alignments that they form to each other and interpret those, and there will be all the answers that you need. And no, you don't need houses. You just think you do. But actually, it's a sign of a deep lack of intelligence and lack of evolution of, what's the word? Of critical thought within
Yeah.
the astrological community that has allowed us to keep this preposterous business alive. When astrologers get into an argument about which house system is better than which other one, I just basically want to laugh. They're all as bad as each other.
So for you, aspects are pretty much foremost.
Yes.
Yeah. What about minor aspects?
What do you call a minor aspect? An aspect's an aspect.
Semi-sextile.
That's not a minor aspect, it's an aspect.
You think it's it should be grouped along with the more regular ones?
Yes, I don't know where this minor and major came from, or who considered themselves to have the right to, elevate some aspects to, oh yes, we're all going to stand and look up to the square, but oh, we'll look down on the semi-square because it doesn't matter as much. I don't know where that came from. No, but as far as I'm concerned, I mean, and okay, and to that extent at least, yes, of course I have some sympathy with the concept behind harmonics, because the more you go into what some people call the minor aspects, the more you begin to divide the chart up into the same kind of segmentation that you receive when you do a harmonic calculation.
Yeah, when I say minor, I mean less commonly used, I suppose.
All right.
So, well, I mean, got things like the septile and the quintile, haven't you? And
Yeah, I really like the quintile series.
yeah,
Big fan of the quintiles. And yes, to some people, even the quintile itself is considered minor. But no, to me, they're important. And actually,
right.
the general rule I tend to follow is if it's in Raphael's, it's probably there for a reason. Interpret it.
Yeah, sure. What kind of advice would you give to students these days
I would say
who seriously want to learn
if
it?
if you're going to be a student astrologer, you must carry a large pinch of salt with you your whole life long. Be wary of your own credulity, or ultimately it will create a vortex into which you disappear, never to emerge again. And be wary too, desperately wary, of the concept of the self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah,
I wish more astrologers just understood the power that their words have on other people, and learn to be delicate and learn when to keep your mouth shut, and learn too that not everything in the world can be answered by astrology. If you ever let your a sense of interest in astrology become more of a driving force in your life than your own common sense,
yeah,
you're on a hiding to nothing.
yeah. I agree. I mean, what do you see as your main aim as an astrologer? What does it mean
Um,
to you?
My aim as an astrologer is the same as my aim as a human being, really, which is that I'd like to feel that the people I come into contact with feel a bit happier after they've
Yeah.
spoken to me than they did before, that I've had some role to play in being a force for quote-unquote good in the world. And I like to make people think. I think it's important. I think the world's full of people who don't think long enough or hard enough about far too much. Um, so at that level, I see my work in astrology as a reflection generally of the way I lead my life. I like to make people think a bit, and I also like to try and cheer them up.
Well, you've made me think today. Thank you very much indeed.
A
It's
pleasure.
bit. Thanks for your very forthright and interesting views there, Jonathan Cainer. Thank you.